Mode of life of viruses. For the objectives, at the end of this lesson, the student would be able to describe the mode of life of viruses. But not only that, we'll be looking at similarities viruses have with living things and some differences between viruses and living things. Yes, we had a lesson on the structure of viruses, and that was under the topic eukaryotes. So please, if you haven't watched that video, do so before you join us for this one. Okay. Before we come to the mode of life of viruses, I want us to look at the relationship between DNA and RNA, because that is going to play a role in our explanation and understanding. I have this image showing a cell, an eukaryotic cell, and it's showing two main parts, the nucleus and then the cytoplasm. And these are what I'm going to use to explain the DNA and RNA briefly. Already I've said that the nucleus is responsible for cell division or production and growth, and to say that it controls generally the activities of the cell. Right. Now the fact is that within the nucleus, there are these materials we call the genetic materials. These genetic materials are in the form of DNA, and they have information for all the activities that are supposed to go on in a cell. So assuming we are talking about cell division means that this cell is going to split into two. And for a cell splitting into two, the new cells that will be formed would have smaller sizes as compared to the old cell. So new substances will be formed, like new proteins would be formed to be added to the new cells to make them larger. All these activities that I've talked about would have to be handled by the instructions that are within the nucleus, so the genetic information, which are all found in the DNA here. But you can see that the DNA has a membrane around it, what you have already talked about. And so these DNA molecules don't come out to do all that work, although a lot of the activities occur within the cytoplasm. But the DNA cannot come out to do the work in here. So there are RNAs that would copy the information from the DNA within the nucleus and bring them here for the activities that are supposed to be done, or the work that is supposed to be done. So RNAs are going to carry them all out here within the cytoplasm. So it looks like the DNA would serve as the master information, and then the RNA would be doing the work of getting the real thing done. Right. So that is the point. Now, for every cell to keep on multiplying itself, or what we call in a sense, reproduction or the cell division, that cell must have nucleus, or it must have the full genetic materials in the case of eukaryotes and prokaryotes. So when you have the full genetic materials, you have your full information, you can form new cells the normal way. But it's different with the case of viruses. They do not have nucleus, and we have talked about that. And so how do they manage to multiply themselves? Viruses can only reproduce when they are inside a living host cell. And how do they do it? They manipulate the host cell. So they don't have the materials, or they don't have that system working, or that machinery that they are going to use to make new of themselves, or new forms of themselves. So what they do is that when they enter a cell, then they cause that particular cell to make new forms of them, the viruses. It's a very funny way to put it, but in quotes, just for you to understand it. It's like going to deceive the cell and causing the cell to do the work of multiplying the viruses. So let's look at that here. I have this image that I got from Britannica. We are going to use to do the explanation and understanding. These are viruses, and there's a cell, assuming there's a cell of a human being, because there are a lot of viruses that infect humans. So there's a cell of a human being, and these are viruses. The first thing the virus would do is that it would have to attach itself to the cell. And I've already mentioned that they attach themselves to the cell using the protein coat, also called the capsid. And it's the same capsid that will also help them to penetrate into the cell. So after attaching themselves to the cell, they enter the cell. Then when they enter the cell, because they are nucleic acid, which is what they need to multiply, because as the nucleic acids they have, whether DNA or RNA, as they multiply, it causes them to also increase in number. But in this case, they are nucleic acid, like it has been shown here. Here, you see that the nucleic acid has been surrounded by the protein coat. So they need to break down the protein coat. So it will be broken down so that the nucleic acid will be free. The next thing is that the virus would have to target the nucleus, because it is a nucleus that has a DNA, and the DNA contains the information that the whole cell obeys. So if the cell would have to multiply itself, the information would come from the DNA. So what the virus would do is that it would have to get itself into the DNA. So assume we are considering like a virus that uses DNA to multiply. So it would have to get itself into the nucleus like this. And when it gets itself successfully into the nucleus, now it has also come with its own information. And the information is that cell makes more viruses. So now the cell would begin to make more of the viruses, like we're going to see in this case. And when the cell makes a lot of the viruses, they fill the cell. They become too many, and in some cases, it would cause the cell to burst. And after the cell bursts, it releases them, and they would go and attack other cells. That is how viruses behave. And this is how they manage to multiply themselves. They don't have the real materials or the real machinery to cause them to multiply themselves. So they only depend on that host cell. So causing the host cell to make them the viruses. It is quite interesting, but that is how they also manage to cause diseases. Yes. Okay, so for the sake of those of us who want to put something down in the form of notes. So far I've said that a virus attaches itself to the host cell as a first step in its mode of life. And then it enters the cell and releases its nucleic acid into the host cell. So the next thing is that the host cell would produce materials that are needed for the formation of the new viruses. So whether in the form of proteins or nucleic acids. This video, so if you want to write the notes, you can just pause and then write them and proceed thereafter. So these materials are then assembled to make new viruses. And the new viruses are then released from the cell. Yes, after they have become many in the cell, they are then released from the cell and they infect other cells. So that is it. There is a video here in this link, so you can copy this link and go and watch the video. That is also going to help to enhance your understanding of this concept. Okay, but I want to believe that you have understood everything that has been said in this video. If you have any questions, you can put it in the comment section and I will respond to them. Okay. So now let us look at viruses as against living things. What similarities exist between viruses and living things? The first point is that they have DNA or RNA just like it exists in the living things. They can also replicate like living things replicate. Living things multiply their cells. Viruses also manage somehow to multiply themselves. Both can mutate and evolve. Yes, viruses easily change. They easily change their nature, and that is one of the reasons why it has become so difficult for us to even fight them. They easily mutate and evolve. And both are microscopic. Good. Now let us look at the differences. Viruses are not cells, and we have said that already. They don't have the full genetic materials or the nucleus and cytoplasm to cause them to become cells, so they are not, as compared to living things must have cells to be called living. They do not undergo the processes that we refer to as metabolism on their own. Metabolism occurs in living cells, so that differentiates them from living things. And thirdly, they do not reproduce by themselves. So even with the replication that increases their number, they do not do it by themselves. They force the cell to do it for them. And they also do not carry out other life processes. A living thing must carry out the 7 life processes. Okay, so that is what we have for our lesson today. We have talked about the mode of life of viruses, and we have looked at some similarities viruses have with living things. and differences between viruses and living things. Alright, I have these few simple questions that you will try, and you can send your answers to me or in the comment section, and I'm going to respond to them. So the first one is, how would a virus cause disease when it enters a host organism? Then the second question, what characteristics do viruses have in common with living things? Then thirdly, why are viruses considered as cell-like particles but not cells? Okay, so that is what we have in our lesson today. And next we are going to look at prokaryotes. And we are going to look at prokaryotes because they are the advanced form in terms of the cell's organizational system, or in terms of the cell's structure. Eukaryotes do not have nucleus at all, but here we are going to look at those ones that have the full genetic materials, but their genetic materials are not surrounded by membrane like in the case of eukaryotes. So these are more advanced as compared to the viruses. So that is what we are going to look at in our next lesson. Okay.